everybody for coming out this morning. This park is actually the first park that Delaware County owned. It was donated in 1935 to be a bird sanctuary and arboretum. And being a bird sanctuary and arboretum, we've really taken to heart. We have documented over 60 species of trees, and we keep adding more. Like this morning, we'll be adding pecan, for example, and well, beach plum is a shrub, but also American plum. There are different, new trees that we'll be adding. And we've also documented 129 bird species. So sort of not originally by design, but as it turns out, over the years, we've planted a lot of these trees that have, edible components, nuts and fruits. We have pawpaw trees in this area that we've planted over a few years that this year, for the first year, actually bore fruit. And one of our volunteers gathered some, and we were actually able to taste the pawpaw. It's amazing if you've ever had a pawpaw. So we're going to be adding to that. So this is sort of an unofficial food forest because almost everything that we're planting today is edible. And Marcia will talk more about that. And I will turn things over to Marcia.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for contributing to your community today. That's what you're actually doing, right? In one of our national public lands. You might think that all you're doing here today is clearing weeds, cleaning up the park, and planting a few trees, but actually what we're doing is we're contributing to a critical role in the life cycle of not only us, but the wildlife that's in this area and our watershed. So your work is protecting the tree canopy for wildlife and also for the groundwater. So today we're planting mostly human edible plants. And you probably didn't know that many of our native plants are edible. And many of the plants that we eat are native. So pecans, we're planting a pecan tree today. We have a mulberry tree. We have an American plum tree that we're planting. We have a shagbark hickory. So, and as Stephanie mentioned, we have pawpaws, which were absolutely delicious. But these, of course, are providing food for humans, but also for wildlife, particularly in the fall migrations. They need, in the spring, they're feeding their young and they're looking for caterpillars, but at this time they need that extra energy for their migration, and they get that from the fruit.
So our first demonstration will be showing you how to remove an old deer fence and replace it with a tree guard for the plants that have grown sort of sturdy enough to withstand deer running into them.
So first demonstration, we're going to take care of this tree, and we're going to show you how we're taking out the cage. This is a pawpaw. We have our goal here is to have a pawpaw grove at some point. They will eventually, once we can take the cages off, they will start to maybe sucker out a little bit. Certain trees and shrubs, you look at some of these trees and you think, oh, they just kind of grow up. But a lot of things have a tendency to sucker. And these are one of the things to do. So here's a pawpaw, there's one there, there's one there. You want to plant them somewhat close together because they pollinate each other. And that's where the fruit comes from.
By the way, George and I are the fencing team, which actually sounds funny. I wish we were actually in the fencing team. Something I always wish I learned to do. But so we'll be doing the majority of the fencing. So when you get to a point where a tree needs a fence, let us know. But everybody will be doing, in your teams, taking apart the old cages, which usually involves, let's see if there are any zip ties.
Yeah, there's one over here.
Okay. So the first thing that you'll do is just get it detached. And in some cases, it may be that there are branches growing through. In this case, we had already notched out this so that this branch could be free and not get damaged. But we would rather cut holes. Oh, and here's another one. So we would rather cut holes in a fence rather than hurt a tree. Although in this case, because we're replacing with a tree guard, we've decided, and hold on, because in this case we've decided we're actually going to cut off the lower limbs. Marcia was assessing it. Marcia is the one that gets to make the decisions on whether or not, how many limbs we're cutting off of a tree. But in this case we pre-assessed it and we're going to cut off all of these lower limbs.
Yes.
And one thing, and this is important, we have all these tree tags which are helpful when somebody might be coming through and saying, oh, what kind of tree is that? And they can look at it. Sometimes we say, maybe it's in the winter and there are no leaves, and we say, what kind of tree is that? And we look at the tree tag, or and sometimes the tree doesn't make it, and we like to make sure that we know what it was and what year we planted it. So these metal tree tags, if you see them, look for them and please save them, and then just put them on a higher branch so that the tree is still labeled. So I'm going to do that right now. And Marcia will cut off the lower limbs. One thing I just want to point out while we're doing it, the way to get these posts out usually, if you just do it back and forth, like side to side, the way that the post is, usually it'll become loose enough to be able to just pull it out. Occasionally you might need to dig it out, but usually, you know, you just have to keep repeating until you're making a little progress, to pull it up a little bit and do it back and forth without hopefully hurting the tree. But again, we're cutting this branch off. There it goes. Just takes persistence. And then this we can reuse.
What we're going to do is be putting this on it, and why are we doing this? We're trying to protect it from deer running. That's the main reason we're doing this. All right, we're ready to go. So we get these two first, and that would help.
Yep.
Okay. So when you're pruning, you see this collar around the branch. This is a pretty well established. This has been here for a couple of years. You want to cut it as close to that collar as you can, but you don't want to cut into the bark. You don't want to strip the bark. So you want to have a nice sharp tool. You want to lop it quickly, because sometimes what will happen is you'll do that and it'll strip the bark of the actual trunk of the tree. So that's why you want to do it as quickly as you can and as neatly as you can. There we go on that. Hopefully this will get this one too. All right. And did we decide on these two? Where's our...
Yeah, let's see. We think we have to trim those branches as well, but we're going to see. And with these guards, sometimes, this one's actually a little bit of a hybrid. I guess it was cut diagonally, but a lot of times there's a end with spikes and then there's a smooth end. And so putting the spiky side down helps it to sort of stay put in the ground, and it looks a little bit nicer at the top. And then, actually, I'm gonna take my gloves off for this. These are so much easier than the deer fencing, because all you do is put on 4 zip ties. And then we cut off the ends of the zip ties just so it looks neat. But 4 zip ties is all it takes. And then this way, you know, as Marcia was explaining, at least the deer can't rub off the bark.
It's also protecting it from our very conscientious park maintenance people that come and mow this area. We've actually created a little bit of a problem for them, because they used to be able to just bring their, their giant mowers through, and we are trying to make sure that the bark is not cut. But anyway, often you will see, and right up by the courthouse, this was an example not that long ago, there was a tree there and it wasn't protected, and they'll weed whack the weeds around it. They'll weed whack and weed whack and weed whack, and over the years it cuts into the tree. And one day we were walking up past the courthouse and the whole tree had just caved over. Because it, when you take that bark off, and this is a little bit of an aside, but in any tree, all the nutrition is coming right up under the bark, is where the xylem and phloem is. The inside wood, that hardwood, that's heartwood. It's almost kind of dead wood. It's supporting the tree as a structure, but all the nutrition is coming up in that outside area of the tree. So that's why you want to protect that. From, at home, your own lawn mowers or whatever, and weed whackers. So look, that's our first job done. Looks great. Thank you, Paul. We are sorry we had to take your limbs off. Okay, so we're going to get over and do a little demonstration on the planting. Mm-hmm. All right, so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to show you how to plant a tree or a shrub if you haven't done this before. This is the Aronia, or the Photinia melanocarpo, the black chokecherry, and it produces a fruit which the birds love. But these fruits are also used medicinally, and you can, I guess, sort of boil them down, make a jelly type of thing out of them. But it's going to get kind of big eventually, and it's a good shrub for not only creating habitat, because birds will kind of nest in there, but it also gives them that fruit that we were talking about for the fall migrations. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to, I'm going to get my gloves on here. You'll notice that we have flags around where you're going to be planting. If when you're planting, you put your shovel in and you hit something hard, feel free to move the shovel. You can move the plant within a couple of feet of the flag. We don't want to break anybody's back, right? So the first thing you want to do, and I don't think we have any really huge containers. I think maybe 5 gallon is the biggest container we have. So the first thing you want to do is loosen up the container. just a little bit. And these are pretty wet because we had that rain on Thursday. And you want to ideally, oh, that's perfect. That comes out nicely. You want to be careful when you take it out. Hopefully it's loose enough like that, and these did get pretty wet. So you just kind of loosen it out. You don't want to, you know, do too much damage to this. Leave the tags on. And this one is in pretty good shape. Now you see we have some darker roots in here, not too many. You want to loosen this, your root ball up a little bit. We haven't had a chance to check all the root balls, but you want to give it a little loosen. You don't want to take all the soil off, but you want to loosen it up so that it has we're encouraging it to kind of go out into the soil. So let's start digging, and you want to dig a hole that is 2 times as wide or 2.5 times as wide as the pot, but only as deep as the pot. So you're going to dig a bowl, okay? What we're trying to do is encourage the roots to move out into the native soil. It's out there. And you'll notice that we're not putting any amendments in here. So by amendments, I mean we're not putting compost in, we're not putting, you know, fertilizers or anything like that. You want the tree, because it's going to be living here in this area, you want it to start engaging with the native soil that's out there now. Whereas if you just dig a hole that's the same as the pot, very often what will happen is it'll stay in that pot. I've seen that happen where you go back years later and the root ball, and when I say root ball, this is the root ball. The root ball is intact in there. It hasn't been, it hasn't engaged into the soil. And what that promotes in the winter, especially in this area, is we have a lot of freeze-thaw incidents happening. So you will get a heavy freeze, and then we'll get a thaw, and a freeze and a thaw, and that causes the root ball to raise up. You'll see it sticking up maybe about 1 inch or 2 above the ground by the next spring. Let's see. There we go. Can you see that? Now let's take the shovel, and if you put this shovel at the base of your tree or shrub, you'll see that it's level with the soil, okay? I'd rather have it be like a 1/2 inch above than a 1/2 inch below, because it's going to have a tendency to want to sink down after a period of time. So a little higher is better. So that's the first thing we're going to do.
Want to put a little soil?
Yeah. So we loosened this up. We got all the heavy roots out of the bottom. We got some white roots in here. They're going to start sinking into the soil, going out that way. And so that's loosened in there. And we'll start putting the soil back in. Some of this, put some of this back in. What we'll then do is we'll get the hose or a bucket, and we'll water it and let that soil sink down, and then we'll put the rest of the soil on top, and then water it again and let it sink down. And after that is done, we'll put some mulch on it. Now the main thing I want to tell you about mulch is you don't want the mulch to touch the bark of the shrub or the tree. It should not touch the bark. And I almost feel like I almost feel like a broken record with that. But if you go just about anywhere in the borough, you don't have to go in the borough. Just go look across the street. There's somebody did a very good job of making mulch volcanoes of that little forest over there, and they put up their proud sign there to say, "Come get us. We'll do this in your yard too." You don't want mulch volcanoes. By a mulch volcano, I mean you see that mulch that gets mounded up, and then the next year that landscaping crew comes and they put more mulch. And what it's doing is it's starving the shrub or tree of oxygen because they breathe through the bark. But it also encourages little critters in the winter to burrow in there and eat that xylem and phloem that I was talking about. So they'll get in there and girdle it by chewing the bark around, getting nutrition for themselves, right, and killing the shrub or the tree. So that's why we don't want that bark to touch. And can we get some water? Oh, we got look. Holy moly. Holy moly. All right, so I'm gonna
You want to water it first and then mix?
Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. There we go. So give it a good shot. And those of you that can use the hose, do. If not, you can fill up a container of. You have a number of these buckets around. So you see, we've created like a little. See how that's sinking down? That's nice. In this area, we have a lot of clay. Sometimes it doesn't drain as well, but this was pretty good soil. Yeah, that's good. Hang on a sec. Here we go. So there you are in that center section right there. Just take a look. There might be a few surface roots. Just make sure the surface roots are covered. And that's good to go. Now we're ready for the mulch. We'll put that on. But yeah, the aronias that are on either side, they have red berries. That's the red chokecherry. And the birds love them. And in the fall, the color is spectacular. It's just starting to get the red fruit. And then I'm going to give it another shot of water. Let it really soak in. And one of the reasons that we plant at this time of year is fall is the best time to plant shrubs and trees. Hands down. Why? Because if you were to plant this in the springtime, that shrub or tree would be really focused on producing leaves and berries and flowers and putting all of its energy into that. What it's going to be doing now, because the leaves will be gone in a couple of months, it's going to put all of its energy into producing the roots and getting a good foundation over the winter. And then the snows will come, hopefully, and the rain of the fall and the winter, and that will help to establish the roots. And then come spring, we'll come back and look, and we should see some nice shoots. And then in the spring, we'll get some flowers. And this is really a nice four-season plant, particularly that aronia. You get the beautiful flowers in the spring, you get the leaves nicely all through the winter, all through the summer, and then you get the berries in the fall that are beautiful. So that's something I always like to think about. And one thing I'm going to point out is you'll notice on this leaf, there are some holes in that leaf. That's a good sign. Okay, that's a good sign because that means that some animal is eating that. Maybe a caterpillar that's going to turn into a nice butterfly, right? So don't be discouraged by that. That's just part of the ballet of nature, as Jacques Cousteau said. You know, you want to make sure, and that's one of the things about why we plant the native plants, is that they've established themselves in relationship with the insects and the animals and the birds that have developed with them, and they can eat these types of things. Okay, ready to roll?
Yeah.